Hey everybody, welcome back to a new video. Here on the table I have the brand new Pecron E3600LFP. Now earlier this year when I was at CES, this created a lot of hype. Tons of people were excited about it, so it's super exciting to have this here on the table so I can show you guys how it actually performs. Now why is the E3600 so exciting? Well, you get so much for your money. For example, this has a 3072 watt-hour lithium iron phosphate battery, and it also has a large 3600 watt pure sine wave inverter, and you get this for a launch price of $15.99. I even have a 5% off discount code that I'll include down in the video description that brings the price down to $1,520 or only 49 cents per watt hour. Now with a price that good, you always have to wonder what type of compromises are you accepting going with a budget product. But I'll tell you, after all the extensive testing that I've done on this power station, you're not really taking any compromises. This performs just as good as the larger brand names, and I'll show you that here in the video. But first, let's jump into all the basic features of the E3600. Now, I already mentioned that this has a 3 kilowatt hour battery with a 3600 watt inverter, but I like that it also has this RV port here so you can connect up to a transfer switch or to your RV. Now for solar input, this supports 2400 watts via the dual MPPT solar charge controllers, and each one has an input limit of 150 volts, which is upgraded over their previous generations. Now as for the screen, it's a really nice display. It's a touch screen. You can jump around and see a bunch of different settings, and you can see the battery health. There are so many options. We'll break this down later in the video. Now I love that this power station has the 30 amp DC output. This is an XT60 kit for about 400 watts. You also have a 5525 barrel port and a 12 volt cigarette port. Now taking a closer look at the available USB ports, you have 2 USB-C power delivery ports and 4 quick charge ports. Now as you can see, there are a ton of outputs on the front of the power station, but there are other features that I want to mention. This does have smart app connectivity, so you can upgrade the firmware and change the settings of the device remotely. As an added bonus, you have 2 wireless charging pads on the top of the power station. This also has internal fast wall charging, so there are no external charging bricks. This actually comes with 2 different charging cables, a 15 amp cable good for 1800 watts and a 30 amp cable good for 3600 watts. So you can charge this really quick. This also has a dedicated UPS functionality with a cutover time of 8 to 20 milliseconds, and we'll be measuring that later in the video. Now, if you want to expand this, you have the ability to attach 4 expansion batteries for up to 15 kilowatt hours of capacity. And say you want to get split phase output down the road, you can purchase another head unit. And if you have 2 of them, you can put them together with their special hub and get 240 volt split phase output. Now, if anybody's interested in picking up one of the expansion batteries, I've been able to test one of these. This is the EP3000. It's the 48 volt expansion battery, and it's compatible with this one and also the E1500. Now, I love that this expansion battery cable has 90-degree connectors, so it does not stick out very far. And these batteries are actually usable on their own. They have a 400 watt MPPT solar charge controller. They also have 2 USB ports and a 30 amp DC output. So these batteries are very capable on their own, and you can also connect them up to the power station to get an extended runtime. And remember, you can connect 4 of these for a massive setup. Well, now that I've covered all the basic features and specifications for the E3600, how does it actually perform? What is the real-world performance for this power station? Does it stack up against the other big brand name power stations, or does it fall flat and have a bunch of quirks or issues? And that's what we're going to find out next. We're going to start with our testing on the AC inverter. We're going to put it through a max load test to see how it actually stands up, see how loud the fans are, see what type of capacity we can get from this. We know it's advertised to have 3072 watt hours, but how much usable capacity does it actually have? After doing the AC inverter testing, we're going to test the DC output and USB ports, and then we're going to put this through a ton of different charging demos to see how it actually works. Let's jump into it. How does the power station perform under a max load test? I started by setting up a 3600 watt load on the inverter. After the test had been going for a few minutes, I took a closer look with my oscilloscope. It was showing a pure sine wave output. I measured 121 volts at 60 hertz even while the power station was at peak load. After 10 minutes had passed, the power station fans were at full speed, and I measured only 52 decibels with my sound meter from 3 feet away. I also measured the exhaust air temperature with my thermal camera. I saw a peak of 121 degrees Fahrenheit near the exhaust fan ports, meaning they do a good job moving air through the internal components. Soon after that measurement, The stopwatch hit the 15-minute mark and the power station passed the max load test. But how many watts will the inverter allow you to pull before it actually shuts down? I turned up the load from our previous test to around 4,300 watts, and the power station ran this for about a minute and then shut off the inverter and displayed an overloaded error message on the screen. It's nice to have that extra power available even for a brief time if needed. Another important aspect of an inverter is the surge capability, or the ability to start up a surge load. So I'm here in my shed and I want to test the surge capability with a few different saws. So first I want to test with this circular saw, then we'll test with this compound sliding miter saw, and then we'll see if it can power this table saw. Now I recently got this from a friend, so we'll see if it can actually start it up. Now in order to get the full functionality of the inverter, just in case this actually matters, I am using the 30 amp plug to a 15 amp adapter. So if you are able to get any more surge potential out of the inverter, it should be through this port. So let's start with the first saw. Small saw, 3, 2, 1. Medium saw, 3, 2, 1. So I have the table saw plugged in. Let's go ahead and see what happens. So that's pretty impressive. It started up this 10-inch 15 amp table saw, and the other two saws just fine. So the surge capability of this inverter is actually pretty good. In the next test, I want to see if the Pecron E3600 inverter has an open or bonded ground. So let's use my outlet tester here. We're going to go ahead and plug this in. So it does show that it has an open or floating ground whenever it's not charging from the wall. Now I've just connected the wall charging cable, and you can see that it is properly grounded whenever it's in UPS mode or charging from the wall. In the next section of the video, I want to test the UPS cutover time for the E3600. It's advertised to be anywhere from 8 milliseconds all the way up to 20 milliseconds, so I'm interested to see the actual speed. Now plugged into the inverter, I have my desktop workstation, LED monitor, and studio lights, and that weird green screen is me running a stress test on the computer to actually put a load on the power supply. This is charging from the wall, and I also have my oscilloscope connected up. Recording in 3, 2, 1. So here is the recording from my oscilloscope. You can see the power was coming in, it cut out. This flat line is where the power was lost, and then it started back up. And that is a measurement of 9 milliseconds. So a very fast UPS on the E3600. Now I want to go ahead and do a couple more UPS tests just to make sure the computer and monitor keep running. So we'll do our second one, 3, 2, 1. Third and final UPS test, 3, 2, 1. So you can see from this testing here that you can definitely run sensitive devices on the UPS mode, desktops, monitors, they should all work well with this fast cutover time. Moving along to our next test, how much usable capacity should you expect from the E3600 inverter? The internal LFP battery is rated for 3,072 watt hours of capacity. When draining the power station down until the inverter shut off, I was able to measure 2,760 watt hours of usable capacity. This result is 89.8% of the advertised capacity and is a great result, hitting our goal of at least 85%. You can also connect up Pecron's new 48 volt expansion batteries to an additional 3,072 watt hours per battery. I connected up one expansion battery to the E3600 for a total of 6,144 watt hours. Doing a second capacity test, I measured 5,640 watt hours of usable capacity, or 91.7% of the advertised capacity. This is a great result for this test. Next, how much power is used as the AC inverter is enabled and sitting idle? I started with the power station fully charged and left the inverter enabled for 12 hours with no load, and when I came back it was sitting at 86% state of charge, meaning the inverter had used 14% of the battery after 12 hours, or about 1.16% per hour, which is an excellent result for such a large inverter. Does the power station inverter create any interference or noise when enabled? This test is helpful for people wanting to run sensitive audio equipment. Using my dirty electricity meter, the electromagnetic interference reading was measuring 1,750 millivolts of EMI noise. I also wanted to test with my guitar and plugged into the inverter to see if the output would be affected. Comparing the inverter output to wall power demonstrates that the E3600 does have a very slight noise on the inverter. In my final test, I wanted to demonstrate how long the E3600 could run critical loads during an extended power outage. The power station was connected up to my 10-circuit transfer switch, running a variety of loads like my full-size refrigerators, internet and router, home office, and even Wave 2 air conditioner. During this test, I saw an average of 550 to 750 watts being used, with the occasional jump in higher wattage as larger appliances were turned on. So how long did the E3600 run during this test? Well, it ran for a little over 12 hours, with 3% remaining before I ended up turning it off before going to sleep. Now, of course, you could get a longer runtime if you had solar panels to charge this up during the day, and you'd expect about half the runtime if you only had the main head unit, because I had an expansion battery connected during this test. So let's run through the AC inverter test results. Now, when we did our max load test, we were able to get the full 3600 watts without it shutting down. And then we pulled 4300 watts for about a minute, and then it finally shut down. Now, during that test, we got 121 volts output, 60 hertz, and the sine wave actually looked really, really good. Now, the fans actually weren't that loud during that test. Under max load, that's as loud as they're gonna get. It was 52 decibels. But I will say, as I'm using this just throughout the day, the fans really don't kick on too much, and they aren't that loud. So just keep that in mind as someone that would be using this all the time. Now, for our UPS test, we got 9 milliseconds cutover time, which is really good. And for our capacity test, we got 89% of the rated capacity with the standalone unit. And then when we added an expansion battery, we got 91%. So it did improve with adding an expansion battery. And those are both really good results. Now, the only thing that would be the minor complaint about this unit so far is the fact that it did have a little teeny bit of noise on the AC inverter. You had to turn it up really loud, and you could hear a little bit of that little crackling background buzz noise. But it's definitely not as bad as some other power stations, but just keep in mind that there is a little bit of noise on the AC inverter. Now, in our next test, I want to do testing on the DC output to see how many watts we can get from that and test the USB ports, so let's jump into that. So let's take a closer look at the DC output. Right here, you push and hold this button to turn it on, and then you have your 12 volt output here and your USB ports right here. Now, zooming in a bit, right here we have an XT60 port, which is good for 30 amps output. Below that, we have a barrel port. This is a 5525. And then next to that, we have a 12 volt cigarette port. Now, connecting up my battery load tester with no load, you can see that the output is regulated at 13.4 volts. In my first test, I want to see how many watts I can get from the XT60 30 amp output. I have both of my battery load testers maxed out. So zooming a bit in on the screen, you can see we're pulling over 400 watts from this XT60 port. So that'll allow you to run a lot of DC loads at the same time. Now, how much power can we get from this 12 volt cigarette port? If you look at the screen, we're getting 180 watts, and that is the limit of my battery load tester. So this is a very capable 12 volt cigarette port. Now, keep in mind, if you're going to pull this much power, you want to make sure your 12 volt cigarette plug is high quality. Now, this one right here is rated for 20 amps, so I'm not worried about it, but some plugs are very weak. They're rated for 10 amps and they might melt at this much power, so just keep that in mind. Now, lastly, I want to test the 5525 barrel port, and we're pulling 150 watts from that port right now, and that's as high as I want to go with this port. It actually does let me go a little bit higher, and I'll turn this up just so you guys can see, but I would not recommend pulling that much power from this port, but you can see that it is available. It appears that this whole section here is good for 400 watts. Now, under these flaps right here, you have 6 USB ports. So right here, you have a 100 watt USB-C power delivery port and an 18 watt quick charge port. Next, you have a 18 watt USB-C power delivery port with another 18 watt quick charge port. And then right here, you have 2 more quick charge ports good for 18 watts. So I have my USB tester plugged into the 100 watt USB-C port. You can see we're getting power delivery 3.0 at 100 watts. However, it's doing a cycle here. So it gets up to about 35 watts and then resets. So it looks like this device here is having issues with this port. Let's test a different device. Now, sometimes I will see issues with USB-C devices talking to each other. So I just wanted to test with another option. This is my Energizer 320. And you can see we're actually charging at 100 watts from that 100 watt USB-C port. Now, what about the second USB-C power delivery port? Well, with my USB tester plugged in, we are getting power delivery 3.0 at 27 watts. Now, what's interesting is this is labeled as an 18 watt port, but we are getting more power from it. Now, what about the USB-A quick charge ports? With the USB tester connected in, we are getting quick charge 2.0 protocol at 12 volts. We are getting near 18 watts. Now we can test the other ports really quick here. So let me go ahead and connect to this one. We'll see if we can get the full 18 watts out of that. Yep, we're getting 18 watts on that one. Let's test the two final ports, the top quick charge port. See if we get the same protocol. Yep, quick charge 2.0 protocol with 18 watts. And the final quick charge port, let's see what we get. Looks like we're showing quick charge 2.0 with 18 watts. So all of those quick charge ports work properly. Now the E3600 has two wireless charging pads on the top, and as long as you have the DC output enabled, it will wirelessly charge your phones. Now, how much usable capacity can we pull from the DC output as we discharge the power station? The E3600LFP is advertised to have 3,072 watt hours of capacity. And while draining the power station completely down using two battery load testers till the DC output shut off, I was able to pull a total of 2,719 watt hours. These results were 88.5% of the advertised capacity, which is an excellent result for a large power station like this. How much power is used while the DC output is sitting idle with no load? I started with the test at 100% state of charge on the power station, and checking in 12 hours later, it was at 96% state of charge, meaning the DC output is very efficient. Even though it's a 30 amp output, it only uses 0.33% per hour while sitting enabled. Now for the DC output results, we got 400 watts from that XT60 port. That means that you can power a bunch of things at the same time. So 12 volt fans, LED lights, a 12 volt fridge, diesel heater, 12 volt air compressor, all at the same time without it shutting down. So very capable. Now as for the efficiency of the DC output, we got 88% on the discharge test, which is really good, especially for a power station with a 48 volt battery. And the idle power usage numbers were really good as well at 0.33% per hour. Now, as for the USB ports, it's good to see that there are 6 options there. It was kind of weird that we got 30 watts out of the 18 watt port. And sometimes USB-C power delivery devices have a hard time communicating, but I did test with that second device and got 100 watts out of that port. So it's good that it has the 100 watt port and a bunch of other ports to charge your mobile devices. So in the next section of the video, I want to talk about all the charging options on the E3600. Let's dive into the charging ports first. Now, starting with the DC input ports first, if you want to charge from your car or a 12 volt solar panel, you're going to want to use this here. This is a 5521 barrel port. You can see it's good for 12 to 30 volts input up to 150 watts max. Now these two other ports are the solar charge controllers, and they have been upgraded. You can see they use an XT60 connection versus the aviation port from before. And they also have a voltage range of 32 volts all the way up to 150 volts, so it's upgraded with a higher voltage. Now each one of these supports 1200 watts for a total of 2400 watts input. Now an important note here, you can see that it takes 32 volts to charge here. So you cannot connect up 12 volt solar panels in parallel or use them by themselves in these ports. That's what this port is for. You'll have to use a larger format solar panel or solar panels in series to be able to use both of these ports. Now on the left side of the power station beneath these flaps, you have your AC input and a few other things. Right here for AC charging, this supports 100 volts all the way up to 120 volts AC input, with a limit of 30 amps. Now there are two different charging cables. If you use the 15 amp charging cable here, you can get up to 1800 watts. And if you use the 30 amp charging cable, you can get up to 3200 watts input. We'll be testing that. You have an overt current protection circuit breaker. You have a grounding lug and an RJ45 for communication. Now before jumping into the charging demos, I want to show you that in the Smart app, you do have the ability to adjust the AC charging speed. I have it currently set to 100%, but you have the ability to go all the way down to 10%, so it does have adjustable AC charging. Now I just connected up the 30 amp AC charging cable, and I love that it has that little icon there. We are charging at 3400 watts. Now what's really cool is you can click on this here, and you can see the AC input, so it breaks down the wattage, the volts coming in. It shows you're using the 30 amp charging cable, the temperature of the charging board, and the adjustable charging setting. So we are charging at 100% using the 30 amp charging cable. Now I've just swapped out to the 15 amp charging cable to see how it works. I like that the icon changed there. We have 1700 watts coming in. Breaking that down, you have the 1700 watts here, 115 volts AC. Using the 15 amp charging cable, the temperature of the board inside, and you can see we have it set to 100% charging speed. Now I've just adjusted the AC charging speed to 50% using the Smart app, and And now you can see we've dropped down to 910 watts, so the adjustable charging does work. Now what about pass-through charging on the E3600? Can you use the AC inverter, DC output, and USB ports while charging the power station? If you look closer at the screen, we are charging at 1340 watts input, and we are powering DC and AC loads at the same time, including USB ports. So pass-through charging does work properly on the E3600. In my next test, I want to see if the power station can handle dual charging, meaning AC and DC input at the same time. In this test, I'm going to use the 15 amp AC wall charging cable and 2 solar arrays to see how much power we can get. So looking closer at the screen with both charging inputs connected in, we are charging at 2050 watts of solar and around 973 watts of AC input. We can click on that to break that down. So for the DC input, you can see we're getting 898 watts from this array and 1152 from this array. And if we look at the AC input, we're getting 970 watts, 116 volts input, and is set to the 100% charging level. So it is kind of throttling this at around 3000 watts input, which is a crazy charging speed for just a power station of this size. So yes, this power station does support dual charging input. It gives a priority to solar input first and then fills in the rest with AC charging. Now what about car charging on the E3600? Now there are 2 charging methods for 12 volt charging with the Pecron power station. The traditional method is using a 12 volt cigarette plug connected to a 12 volt battery, so let's go ahead and show you how that works. So with the 12 volt cigarette port connected to my 12 volt battery, we are charging at around 90 watts input. Now that will take a very, very long time on this power station, but luckily there is a faster way to charge from a 12 volt battery. Now this is the Pecron Smart Car Charger. I have a full dedicated video to this if you want to learn more about it, but just giving you a 30-second rundown, this will connect to a 12 or 24 volt battery, whether that's in your car with your alternator charging that or a standalone battery. For example, the input voltage range is 12 to 30 volts. It'll take up to 50 amps from those batteries, and it puts out 42 volts at up to 13 amps. So what does this do? It basically turns a 12 to 24 volt battery into a 500 watt solar panel. Now the Pecron Smart Car Charger is completely plug and play. You have a full harness that connects up to your starter battery or any battery, and then it has MC4 connections coming off of it that connect into the MC4 cables that come with the power station with an XT60 that plugs into one of these charge controllers. So by using this, you can charge from 400 to 500 watts based on the voltage of your battery. Now I love that the Pecron power stations come with these hard storage cases, and I thought I'd show you guys what came with my unit. So you have your 15 amp AC charging cable. Now mine did come with this 30 amp one. I'm not sure if this is an added accessory or if this will come with all of them. We'll have to see. Now on this side you have a zipper pouch. So right here you have your 12 volt car charging cable that I demoed a little bit earlier. You have a single solar array connection with an XT60 that plugs into one of those. Now you have this option here. This is a dual, so it has one set of MC4 connections and then 2 sets of XT60s, and you can put this power station in a parallel mode so that you can double up on your amperage. You also have this cable set here for the 30 amp DC output to kind of charge or boost up a starter battery, a 12 volt lead acid starter battery. So it's time to do some solar testing on the Pecron E3600. So I'm going to be testing with 2 different arrays. This array on my carport is a 1600 watt array. It has a voltage open circuit right under 150 volts. And then this array right here is a 1200 watt array, and it has a voltage open circuit around 120 volts. Now for the actual solar conditions today, we just have a little bit of haze, but it's pretty clear. It's midsummer, right near summer solstice, so the sun's pretty high in the sky. We'll have to see what we get with both of these connected on the E3600. So I've just connected both solar arrays into the dual charging ports, and we are getting 2161 watts input. So if we select this here on the screen, you'll actually get a breakdown of each of these solar arrays. So you can see we're getting 114 volts, 10.5 amps, and 1200 watts. And we're getting 72 volts, 13 amps at 936 watts. I love seeing that breakdown. Now, if you're familiar with the older Pecron power stations, these had a limit of 95 volts open circuit, but now with the upgraded 150 volt limit, it's much more capable with solar panels. And I love that these are completely independent from each other, so you can have a different solar array connected to each one. Now, just as a reminder, each one has a limit of 1200 watts for a total of 2400 watts, and right now we're getting 2198 watts input, so just slightly under that 2400 watt limit. I love how capable this charge controller setup is. In my final charging test, I wanted to make sure that you could have solar panels connected to the E3600, especially in the morning when you didn't have direct sunlight on your solar panels. This usually gives you a low voltage, and on some power stations, you'll have an alarm or a beep when it's connected in the morning. Well, with the Pecron, I tested this multiple days in a row, just leaving the solar panels connected 24/7, and I never noticed any alarms or beeps. It always just started charging in the morning and stopped charging at night. So thumbs up to having solar panels connected all the time. Now, one point that I want to make is that on previous Pecron power stations, the solar charge controllers were a little bit slow to respond, and they definitely upgraded these ones here. As a cloud goes over, the wattage jumps back really quick, and if you connect in solar, it actually reacts very quickly. You know, I've been testing this for about a month, and I've had 2 solar arrays connected basically that entire time, and I've never had issues, and I've always been very happy with the solar performance. So if you are going to be planning to use this with solar as your main charging source, you should not have any worries. Now, as for the actual build quality, this thing is a brick. It comes in at 79 pounds, and it is just this compact brick. There's nothing that seems cheap on it. It seems very well built. And thinking about the actual size of this power station, it's pretty compact. If you compare this to the closest competitor, probably be the Bluetti AC300, which has a similar size inverter, and their batteries have around 3072 watt hours. But the Bluetti AC300 is double the size of this, because just the inverter alone is about this size, if not bigger, and then the batteries are also this size. When they were able to fit the battery in the inverter in a very small and compact package. Now, Pecron does offer a 2-year warranty plus a 3-year extension if you register their product, so you can get a 5-year warranty on this product, and you can do that through their website. So pretty impressive product so far, guys. Through all the testing that we've done, the only thing that I can complain about is a little bit of noise on the AC inverter. That's not too bad. Now, I just wanted to show you guys a quick overview of the display. So you have your estimated time remaining, you have your watts output and your watts input, and the time and date at the top of the screen. Now, you also can see the battery temperature, the voltage, and the state of charge. And if you click this switch button, you can see the layout for your main host and then all the batteries connected, broken down. Now, you can go into each one of these and it'll break the actual output power, the voltage, and the temperature. Just gives you a ton of information there. You can go to the AC output and see the same thing. And then you can also go to the AC input and DC input, giving you a ton of information. Now, as for the actual settings, we can go into the menu. You can see the battery health status. It breaks down the voltage of each individual cell, and then you can also see that for each of these that are connected as in expansion batteries. Now, for the input and output settings, you have a ton of different settings. You can adjust the UPS charging from AC power. You can change the AC charging speed. I have it set to 30% right now. You can set the XT charging mode from independent to parallel. You can do a discharge and charge restrictions and change the frequency and output. Now, under system settings, you have eco mode, screen operations, Wi-Fi. You can also do touch sounds. You can change the time and temperature and the language, and also factory reset. Now, under alarm, you can see what's happened in the past, and you can see I overloaded the inverter when I was testing that and the time and date of that. And then also you can see all the information about the actual device. So this adds so much potential to see what's going on. There's also this simple mode that you can go into, where it just shows you the time, your state of charge, what inputs are on and off, what's coming in and what's going out. So you can go into that simple mode if you'd like. So very cool touchscreen. I love when a power station has this much information. Now, I do think it's important to point out that the same settings that you have via the touchscreen, you also have via the smart app. So in case something happens to the touchscreen, you do have a bit of redundancy that you can still make changes to the settings via smart app connectivity. Now that we've tested this power station, we have all the performance data. I want to take that and put this through my power station grading system so we can compare it head to head against other power stations of a similar size. Now, if you guys haven't seen that before, it's on my website. I'll include a link to it down in the video description, so let's get started. Now, up on the screen, you'll see my Power Station Grading System 2.0. There are 20 different requirements that a power station needs to meet in order to get a perfect score of 10 points. Each one's worth a half point. Now, these are all based on viewer feedback, things like pricing, performance, and feature set. So here are the results for the Pecron E3600. Got a final grade of an A, or 9.5 points out of 10 points available. So a very respectable score for a power station, especially at this price point, beating a lot of the other larger brand names. Now you can see that Pecron is definitely listening to what my viewers are looking for in a power station. Now, we did have to dock 1/2 point due to the noise on the inverter. Now, it was very slight, but it was there, so we are going to take a half point off. But still, a huge thumbs up to Pecron for the great price and the great score on the power station grading system. Well, now that we're coming to the end of the video, I really want to get your thoughts and opinions on the Pecron E3600. What do you guys think about this power station? Please leave a comment down below. Now, after looking at all the performance data, this actually performs really well, maybe even better than some of the larger brand name power stations. It definitely has all the features that you guys are looking for, and the price is really good at 49 cents per watt hour, or $1,520 with my discount code. I'll leave that down in the video description. So I'm excited to hear your guys' thoughts on this power station. Now this year, we've seen a bunch of the really large 240 volt split phase power stations, and those units are really fancy and quite expensive. But do you actually need 240 volts output? Well, maybe some people do, but I'd say that most people don't. An option like this really makes sense because it's much more affordable, but still puts out a ton of power. For example, this will still connect into your RV and give you a full 30 amps. This also has the ability to connect into a transfer switch, as I've showed you guys here in the video, and power critical loads as needed. And you could also just use extension cords going to all your different appliances and you get a really long runtime. So you guys will have to let me know, do you need the full 240 volts output, or are you good with a large 120 volt inverter? Now, I appreciate you guys watching till the end of the video. Please smash the thumbs up button if you like this video. And please share it with your friends and family if you think they would be benefited from learning about a model like this, especially for a backup season with hurricanes, tornadoes, things like that going around. You want to make sure that you are prepared for long-term power outages. Now, I'll recommend a couple other videos that you guys can check out. If you guys have any questions, you can also contact me directly through Ask Me. It's a consulting service. I'll leave the link to that down in the video description as well. Thanks for watching. Looking forward to the next video. We'll see you guys then.